In 1922, one of the most famous thinkers alive walked away from everyone who needed him. Carl Jung, the psychiatrist whose ideas were rewiring how the world understood the mind, started hauling stones by a lake in the Swiss village of Bollingen. No electricity, no telephone, just a 2-story tower he built with his own hands. Every morning he rose at 7, and for 2 uninterrupted hours he wrote. Then he walked. He let his mind go quiet. His rivals whispered that he was running away. They were wrong. Jung was chasing something, a rare kind of focus, the ability to go deep, that a century later has almost vanished from the modern world. Cal Newport calls it the superpower of the 21st century, and almost nobody has it anymore. By the end of this, you'll know why and how to build a tower of your own. Here's the uncomfortable part. You already suspect you've lost it. You sit down to do the one thing that actually matters, and within 90 seconds, your hand reaches for your phone. Not because you decided to, but because your brain twitched. Newport gives that lost ability a precise name: deep work. Professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your mind to its limit, creating new value that's hard to replicate. And its opposite, shallow work, the non-cognitive, logistical busy work you do while distracted, the emails and pings that feel like progress but replicate anything. Most of us now live almost entirely in the shallows. It feels productive. It even feels necessary. But there's a reason the tower called to Jung, and it's about to become the difference between the people who thrive in this economy and everyone else. Meet Jason Bin. A few years out of college, he looked at his job as a financial consultant and realized something horrifying. He had no rare skills. Anyone could do what he did. He spent his days hiding inside spreadsheets, and worse, he couldn't focus long enough to learn his way out, so he ran an experiment. He locked himself in a room with no phone, no internet, and forced himself to study hard computer science for hours until his brain screamed. At first he lasted minutes, but the muscle grew. He learned to code deeply, obsessively, in long, unbroken blocks. Within months, this man with no marketable skills walked into a top development boot camp, then landed a job as a software engineer at a fast-growing startup. His income more than doubled. Nothing about Jason changed except one thing. He learned, again, how to go deep. So why is a skill this powerful disappearing? That's the paradox at the heart of Newport's whole argument, and he states it as a hypothesis. The ability to perform deep work is becoming rare at exactly the moment it's becoming valuable, which means the few who cultivate it and build their working lives around it will thrive, while everyone else stays stuck. Sit with how strange that is. A superpower is getting scarcer because it's getting more valuable. The busier and more connected the world becomes, the fewer people can actually think. And that gap between the distracted many and the deep few is the widest, most exploitable opportunity of your career. Newport's book is built in 2 halves. First, why depth is so valuable. Then, exactly how to reclaim it. Start with the why. Look at what machines are doing to work. Newport points to a great restructuring. Intelligent software is quietly eating the jobs in the middle, and it's splitting the workforce into winners and losers. Think of Nate Silver, who outforecast an entire industry of pundits by wrangling data no one else could. As the machines rise, 3 kinds of people pull away from the pack. Those who can work creatively alongside smart machines, the superstars in any field, and those with capital to invest. You can't easily become an owner overnight, but the first 2 groups are open to you if you can do 2 things. Quickly master hard, complicated skills, and produce work at an elite level in both quality and speed. Here's what unites them. Both are impossible without the ability to go deep. Take the first ability, learning hard things, fast. How does anyone actually get world-class at something difficult? The psychologist Anders Ericsson spent his career on that question, and his answer was deliberate practice, stretching just past what you can currently do with total focus, then absorbing feedback. Not the popular myth of simply logging hours. Focus. The science is almost physical. When you concentrate intensely on a skill, the neurons firing in that specific circuit get wrapped in a layer of insulation, and the signal grows faster, sharper, more permanent. But, and this is the catch, that wrapping only happens when your attention is undivided. Try to learn while glancing at your inbox, and you're sending a weak, scattered signal down the wire. You're not building the circuit, you're just fraying it. To learn deeply, you have no choice but to work deeply. Now the second ability, producing at an elite level. And here Newport hands you an equation that reorganizes how you see your whole day. High-quality work produced equals time spent, multiplied by the intensity of your focus. Multiplied, not added, which means two people can put in the identical hours and one produces a fraction of the other. Because low intensity is a leak, nothing can plug. Consider Adam Grant, one of the most productive academics alive, who batches his hard intellectual work into long, walled-off stretches. Whole seasons for teaching, multi-day blocks for writing, door shut, autoresponder on. He doesn't work more hours than his rivals. He works at a higher intensity, without interruption. But most of us have quietly convinced ourselves we can hit that intensity while checking a message every few minutes. And that belief is doing something invisible and expensive. The business professor Sophie Leroy discovered the hidden cost and named it attention residue. When you switch from one task to another, even for the 5 seconds it takes to glance at a subject line, a piece of your attention stays stuck on the first task. It doesn't snap back. So you return to your real work operating at partial power, dragging a fog behind you. Now multiply that by a workday of constant, casual glances. You never actually give anything your full mind. You spend hours in a permanent state of reduced capacity and call it multitasking. This is why the person who checks email just quickly all day produces so little of value. It isn't the time the checking steals, it's the residue it leaves, a mind that's always half somewhere else and never, ever all the way here. Here's where it gets maddening. If deep work is this valuable, measurably, provably, why has business built offices that make it nearly impossible? Open floor plans, instant messaging that demands you answer now, a culture where a fast reply is prized over deep results. Newport's answer is unsettling. The value of depth is real but invisible. It disappears into what he calls the metric black hole. No spreadsheet can prove that 2 silent, focused hours were worth more than a day of visible activity. And when we can't measure what matters, 2 things rush in to fill the vacuum. We drift toward whatever's easiest in the moment. And we start using busyness itself as our proof of worth, doing lots of stuff, visibly, because we've got nothing else to point to. Depth is dying not because it fails, it's dying because no one's counting. The physicist Richard Feynman understood the trap, and he refused it. He said, plainly, that he cultivated a reputation for being irresponsible, actively irresponsible. He told everyone he was hopeless at committees, hopeless at administrative duties, so they'd stop asking. It looked like arrogance. It was strategy. By shedding the shallow obligations everyone else drowned in, Feynman bought himself the one thing that produces Nobel-level physics: long, unbroken stretches to think. And notice what that means for you. If the whole professional world is stampeding into the shallows, then depth isn't just valuable, it's rare. Bad for business, maybe. But if you're the one person in the open office who can still disappear into hard, focused work, you've found an edge almost no one is competing for. The crowd's weakness is your opening. But there's a deeper reason to go deep, one that has nothing to do with money. Watch Rick Furrer. He stands in a blazing forge, hammering a glowing bar of steel into a Viking sword, folding the metal thousands of times. One wrong strike, a few degrees too hot, and weeks of work shatter. So Furrer doesn't glance at a phone. He can't. The work demands every scrap of his attention, and on his face is something most of us rarely feel at work: reverence. Newport's third argument is that depth doesn't just make you money, it makes your life feel meaningful. And the reason reaches into how your mind is built. The writer Winifred Gallagher, after a terrifying cancer diagnosis, made a discovery that changed how she lived. Your world, who you are, what you feel, what your life even amounts to, is constructed, moment by moment, out of whatever you choose to pay attention to. Which raises a quietly terrifying question about how you've been spending yours. Think about it. If your attention builds your reality, then a life spent in the shallows, inbox to feed to notification to inbox, literally constructs a world that's anxious, fragmented, and small. Not because anything bad happened, because you never looked away from the small things long enough to see anything larger. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying our best moments and found they almost never arrive during rest. They come when a person stretches their mind to its limit voluntarily to accomplish something hard and worthwhile. He called it flow. Depth doesn't drain you. It's where the richest experiences of a human life actually live. Newport half-jokingly renames our species for the people who understand this and lands on a line worth writing down. A deep life, he says, is a good life. Any way you look at it. That's the why. Now, the how. So you're convinced. Tomorrow, you'll just decide to focus. Newport stops you right there, because that plan has already failed 1,000 times. Decades of research say willpower isn't a character trait you either have or lack. It's a finite resource, a tank that drains with every temptation you resist. And you are surrounded all day by things engineered by brilliant people to pull your attention. If you're relying on raw willpower to win that fight, you will lose every afternoon right around the time it matters most. The people who actually live deep lives don't have more willpower than you. They've done something cleverer. They've built rituals and routines and rules so that going deep costs almost no willpower at all. It just becomes the way the day runs. Newport lays out 4 rules to build that life. And the first one starts with a single, strange decision. The decision is this: how will depth fit into your life? Newport shows 4 ways, and the trick is that they're radically different. There's the monastic, the computer scientist Donald Knuth, who abolished his email address entirely so nothing could reach him. There's the bimodal, Jung's approach, splitting life into long retreats of pure depth and stretches of ordinary connection. There's the journalistic, the biographer Walter Isaacson, who could snap into intense writing in any 15-minute gap he found. And there's the one most of us can actually use, the rhythmic. The comedian Jerry Seinfeld built it by accident. To write more, he hung a giant calendar on the wall and put a red X on every day he wrote. After a few days, you've got a chain, and your only job, he said, is to not break the chain. Same time, every day, no debate. The ritual does the deciding for you. Sometimes, though, a routine isn't enough. You need to shock your own brain into depth. When J.K. Rowling was struggling to finish the final Harry Potter book, drowning in distractions at home, she did something absurd. She checked into a luxury suite in a 5-star hotel, hundreds of dollars a night, and stayed until the book was done. She wasn't buying comfort. She was buying a signal. This matters so much, I've made it costly to fail. Newport calls it the grand gesture. Bill Gates famously vanished twice a year into a lakeside cabin with a stack of reading, his Think Weeks, and it was inside one of them that he saw the internet coming and changed Microsoft's course. The gesture works because the sheer weight of the investment tells your mind, this is not the time to check a feed. But protecting depth also means learning how to stop. Here's a counterintuitive one. To go deeper, you must be willing to be lazy. Newport argues your capacity for concentration is finite each day, and downtime isn't slacking. It's when your mind consolidates and recharges for tomorrow's depth. But there's a catch. You can't rest if work keeps leaking into your evening, an unfinished task gnawing at the back of your mind. Psychologists have a name for that gnawing. Unfinished work clings to your attention and won't let go. So Newport ends every workday with a strict ritual. He reviews every open task, makes a rough plan for each, and then says a specific phrase out loud. Shut down, complete. It sounds silly. It works. The phrase is a signal to his own brain that the workday is truly sealed, that it can finally, fully let go. Because a mind that never switches off can never switch fully on. And switching on is the whole next rule. Ask yourself an honest question. When was the last time you stood in a line or waited for a kettle without reaching for your phone? If the answer is, I can't remember, Newport has bad news. You've trained your brain to panic at the very first hint of boredom. And a brain that bolts for stimulation the instant things get dull cannot, later, sit still for 3 hours of hard focus, no matter how much you want it to. The two are the same muscle. So the rule is brutal and simple. Don't take breaks from distraction. Take breaks from focus. Schedule the exact minutes you're allowed the internet. And outside those windows, even while waiting, even while bored, you stay offline. It feels miserable at first. That misery is the workout. You're rebuilding a mind that can tolerate depth, one uncomfortable, unstimulated minute at a time. And the biggest thief of those minutes has a name. It's the tool in your pocket. Newport isn't anti-technology. He's a computer scientist. What he attacks is how we choose our tools, using what he calls the any benefit approach. We keep an app if we can name literally any possible upside or imagine anything we might miss without it. And by that logic, you'd keep everything. Because everything offers some benefit. That's exactly why you're drowning. A craftsman doesn't think that way. A blacksmith doesn't adopt every new hammer that offers a benefit. He adopts the few that substantially improve his core work and rejects the rest. So Newport flips the question. Not could this ever help, but do the benefits to the things I truly care about clearly outweigh the harms? Run your feeds through that filter, and most of them fail instantly because they were built to harvest the very attention your deep work depends on. To see how much they're costing you, run an experiment. Here's the experiment, borrowed from the world of decluttering. When one man wanted to declutter fast, he packed every single thing he owned into boxes, as if moving, then only unpacked an item when he actually needed it. After a week, most of the boxes sat untouched. He'd been surrounded by things he never used. Newport applies the same shock to your digital life. Quit your social media tools for 30 days. Don't announce it, don't deactivate, just stop. Then, after 30 days, ask 2 blunt questions of each one. Would the last month have been noticeably better if I'd had this? And did anyone who matters even notice I was gone? Most tools fail both tests. They don't survive contact with honesty. What survives, you keep, deliberately, on purpose. What doesn't, you finally let go. But quitting the feeds only wins back the evening. Winning back the workday takes something harder. Most people move through their workday on autopilot, letting the next email decide what happens next. Newport finds that horrifying. You'd never let a stranger spend your money that way, yet you let your inbox spend something far scarcer. So the fix is confronting. Schedule every minute of your day. Divide your working hours into blocks and give every block a job before the day, not during it. You'll fail constantly at first. A task overruns, a fire breaks out. Fine. When the plan breaks, you rebuild it on the spot for the hours that remain. The point was never a perfect schedule. The point is that you are forced again and again to look at your time and decide, is this block deep or shallow? Because most of what fills a knowledge worker's day only pretends to be important. And Newport has one devastating question to expose it. Here's the question. Look at any task on your plate and ask, how long would it take to train a smart, recent college graduate with no special background to do this? If the honest answer is a few weeks or less, that task is shallow. It's replaceable, low value, the kind of work that fills a day but builds no rare skill and moves nothing forward. The results can startle you. Whole meetings, whole categories of email, half your week, shallow. Newport's advice isn't to eliminate it all. Some shallow work is unavoidable. It's to give it a strict budget, treat every hour of it as expensive, and ruthlessly protect what's left for depth. And then he adds a constraint that sounds backward, that sounds like it would wreck a career, but does exactly the opposite. He tells you to leave work earlier. Newport calls it fixed schedule productivity. You plant an immovable flag. I'm done working by 5:30, no exceptions. And then you work backward from that wall, hunting for any strategy that lets you honor it. Watch what a hard limit does. Suddenly, you can't afford a 2-hour meeting that could have been an email. You can't afford to check messages 40 times an hour. Scarcity forces ruthlessness. The computer scientist Radhika Nagpal used exactly this discipline to protect her deep work through the most punishing years of an academic career, and became more productive, not less. Because when time is truly limited, you stop spending it on the shallow and you guard the deep. The wall doesn't shrink your output, it shrinks your waste. But there's one last force that will pull you back into the shallows the moment you drop your guard, and it arrives, relentlessly, in your inbox. Every unanswered message is a small tug on your attention, and there are hundreds of them. Newport's answer isn't rudeness, it's design. Make people who want your time do a little of the work. Tell them what you need before you'll reply, so pointless back and forth dies before it starts. When you do reply, don't fire off a quick line that spawns 3 more. Take a breath and send the one message that ends the whole exchange for good. And then, the hardest habit of all, get comfortable letting small, unimportant things simply not get done. As the writer Tim Ferriss put it, develop the habit of letting small, bad things happen. Because if you don't, you'll never find the time for the big, life-changing things. You are not obligated to respond to everything, and accepting that is what finally clears the space where deep work can live. Now, one last story, because Newport saves the strongest form of his argument for the end. Go back to a cold winter in 1974. A college dropout sees a magazine cover featuring a primitive new computer and understands, in a flash, that a window is open and closing fast. For the next 8 weeks, this young man disappears so completely into writing software that his friends can't reach him. He works to exhaustion, falls asleep at his keyboard, wakes, and codes again. The dropout was Bill Gates. The 8 weeks of total monastic depth produced the program that launched Microsoft. His biographer later said the single trait that set Gates apart from everyone equally smart was one word: focus. Not genius, not luck. The willingness, when it mattered most, to go deeper than anyone around him was willing to go. Newport tried it himself. In one deliberate year of guarding his depth, he more than doubled his research output, while still leaving work by 5:30 most evenings. And he's clear about what this is and what it isn't. A commitment to deep work, he says, is not a moral stance or a noble philosophy. It's a pragmatic recognition that the ability to concentrate is a skill, maybe the most valuable one left, and that it gets the important things done. So think back to Carl Jung, hauling stones by that quiet lake, building a tower where the world couldn't reach him. He wasn't running away from his life. He was building the one place where his best work and his deepest self could finally exist. You don't need a stone tower. You need an hour the world can't touch, guarded like it's the most valuable thing you own. Because it is. So the only question left is the one Jung answered a century ago. When will you go deep? The tower is waiting. Build it.